All right, we're gonna go through the final summary briefing for the 420 midwinters. Um, Mainly just the weather strategy principles for Jensen Beach, because I think this is really the stuff that will be beneficial to you always every time you return to this venue, and even you'll be able to take the principles and apply them to other venues as well. But yeah, this again was a super interesting venue because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of different variables, but we can actually put it all together into a framework that makes sense strategically and find some consistent patterns that we can take advantage of and use them to win races. So let's start with this southeasterly first. This is what we had in that first day, right? And so this would be wind traveling. The line is orientated north-south, so traveling out of this bottom corner, kind of 45 degrees across the course this way. This is what we had the first day with the race course. The reach mark was tucked up over here in the mangroves. Top mark was over here. Bottom of the course was down here. And we were racing a pretty southeasterly course axis, probably slightly more to the south. And I think what we observed was, most of our principles that we talked about going into the regatta proved to be accurate. They did have the course pulled really hard left, so it was almost out of the current. Shallower water over here and tucked up into the mangroves, so a lot more relief. So that made it more wind dependent and less current dependent. But in this southeasterly, the main thing is that the breeze coming over this area, by the beat where it says Beach Club here in these mangroves, is really, really strong. Really nice puffs and left shifts, and the people that won the left edge of the race course and came out of the top left were able to hook up to those shifts and win races. I should have added in this both and the southeasterly and the northeasterly that it's hard to chase up the shore side of the beat where there's more shifts, there's more gusts, there's more lulls. It might be the way to win the race, but if you're in the middle of the fleet trying to catch up, sometimes you're better off heading toward the open water in the channel for better consistent pressure, because if you want clear air, there might not be any available to you that's also a puff and a lift in the shiftiness on the shore side of the course. So I think overall, whether it was southeasterly or northeasterly, everyone was able to find good puffs and good shifts by heading towards the beach. But there's a few things that are the same and a few things that are different about these two directions. So in the southeasterly is when I think heading towards the beach is even stronger, especially right here where I have the mouse, kind of where the mangroves meet the city. That was a money spot to hit on this second beat. Earlier, the bottom marks at one point in the regatta were down here, and if you headed into here, the curve of the coast here was really bad. You couldn't go left at that point. I guess the wind, appeared to be kind of curving around that bend that way, and just being light and really shifted right here, but coming out of the bottom left on that right shift, you're stuck. But if you headed to the course left on starboard, aiming for the more up top of the mangroves and the bottom of the city here, that was very, very strong. Let's hit the current before we go into the surface friction and the convergence and divergence. Okay, so for all of these directions, we want to identify which side the flood and ebb current helps, right? So flood current southeasterly is going to say even more head to the beach to get out of the flood current and into the relief. If we have ebb current, which would be current ripping out, which would be going this way, then we want to hit the right. Okay, that's pretty simple. And then we can go over the northeasterly in a sec. So we're trying to line up if the current is reinforcing or conflicting from whatever advantages we're seeing in the wind. All right, so when the breeze is coming southeasterly here, the surface friction of the land clocks the breeze to the left. Okay, the increased surface friction as the breeze goes over the land means the wind is, shifted farther left over the land, and it comes off this land at a farther left shift, but then it does veer to the right as it gets into the open water. Okay, so that actually I think is a reinforcing additional factor to good puffs and shifts coming out of the course left. And that's unique to the southeast and actually the opposite in the northeast. Now, the other variable here is we do not have any convergence of wind if you're heading into the channel. So if the breeze is coming from this direction, southerly or southeasterly into the channel this way, the influence of the land here is going to shift the wind to the left still. Okay, the surface friction is going to shift the wind to the left, meaning that the wind direction right here where the cursor is would be more left, and the wind direction here would be more right, as in they would be pointing away from each other, pulling away from each other. That would create divergence, not really doing anything good for breeze, not necessarily hurting it either, because you would only have that effect after the wind had already passed over you and hit the land. But on the northeasterly, we actually have really strong convergence. Okay, the breeze is shifted left over the land relative to the ocean, which means that two arrows of those two different directions are coming towards each other, compressing the breeze and creating a channel of increased pressure and all good things on the course left. All right, I'll show you this more specifically in a second. So that's some key differences to the southeasterly and the northeasterly. Okay, in both circumstances, we have great consistent pressure in the channel, and we have, more variable puffs and lulls and shifts that we can play off the beach. But in the southeasterly, the surface friction, I think, is actually helping us in terms of creating more lefties off the beach. And the fact that there is no convergence of pressure in the channel makes the course right open race course strategy less strong than it is for the northeasterly. In the northeasterly, if you head to the course right, looking for shifts, and you get a light spot or surface friction, you're going to get righties in that light spot. Okay, the wind's got to come over this land. All that surface friction is going to bend the wind right, and then especially if you're in a lull after the wind's gone over all of that friction, then you're gonna be increasingly likely to have a righty in that lull while you're stuck to leeward of the fleet that's all to the course left of you, which is the opposite here. If you're heading to the beach here, even without a puff, on the southeasterly, if you're heading to the beach, even without a puff, you're likely to pick up a good lefty, even in the light spots. And then in the northeasterly, when you head out to the open ocean, you get really, really strong convergence of pressure here. Try not to repeat myself too much. Let's go to what shows you this a lot more clearly, if I didn't hide it from myself. Where did it go? It's in my downloads. So this just is simple graphics showing the wind being back to the left over to shore, right? And then as it comes out onto the beach, it veers to the right. So you have to be careful generalizing too much that going to land is better or worse because of these changes, because it's very dependent on the distance from land that we're having the changes, right? So actually away from the land, it's veered right relative to close to the land where it's farther left. But overall, it does set up this kind of play here, right, where we can head to the land, and we're likely to have some type of bend like this within 1 kilometer of the shoreline. Now, convergence is what we see on the course left in the northeasterly. Okay, when the breeze comes into the course left on the northeasterly, on shore, the wind is made to shift to the left because of surface friction on the land, which is greater than on the water, and that converges the two airstreams, and which is why the channel is increasingly strong in the northeasterly, and in the southeasterly you actually have divergence. You have the opposite. Okay, this graphic here, if you guys find this PDF on your own, explains the divergence and the convergence depending on the wind direction relative to land. Okay, so you'll have to twist this map around in your head to make sense of it, but in the northeasterly with the wind direction, and this is relative to this inside shoreline that I'm talking about, in the northeasterly, when the wind's coming this way relative to this shoreline, that's when we get that convergence. Okay, and then when we are in the southeasterly, the breeze more this way, that's closer to divergence, right? But one interesting thing about this graphic, as you see, when the wind's blowing onshore, there's no bend. The change in the wind happens off the race course, right? There's just no positive change from that divergence. It's not helping, it's not particularly hurting either. But when we have the convergence, the wind is compressed more from the land, and it actually makes its way onto like a very, very strong race course effect that funnels wind down that course left, making that course left increasingly strong in the northeasterly. So the channel side is stronger in the northeasterly relative to the southeasterly, where the shore side is stronger in the southeasterly. So in both the northeasterly and the southeasterly, it's actually course left is likely to be more predominant, and then that also depends on the current factors, right? We have to factor those in and compare that to where on the race course we are. But yeah, course left is very strong in the northeasterly because we have that convergence factor. So if you can head out into this current, that's awesome. We did have people still win races from playing the shifts up the right, but especially the last two races of the regatta, the course left convergence was in full effect. The first races where it was lighter and there wasn't quite as much of a developed wind pattern, I think, even though the wind was... I was going to say something inaccurate. The wind was forecasted to shift one way, but the other side worked. The wind was forecasted to shift right throughout the day, and it did a few degrees, but because it filled in and became stronger, the convergence and the lefty oscillations were much, much of a stronger factor than the few degrees of right gradual shift over the course of hours. Yeah, I'm going to stop there.